The emperor's affection for Wan Yuan came so easily, so enviably. Lowering her head with a smile, she watched the palace servants kneel before her, fawning as they addressed her as noble lady. Only the eunuch by the emperor's side let out a sigh. The world knew the emperor favored women like noble Lady Yuan, but didn't know why he favored them. The year Wan Yuan entered the palace was early spring. It was still cold in the capital, with snow falling softly. She was helped down from the carriage, snowflakes scattering over the pale green velvet flower ornament in her hair. A nanny draped a cloak over her shoulders, and Wan Yuan stepped cautiously onto the thin layer of snow, walking into the palace gates. She was 16 that year. The nannies all said Wan Yuan had a face destined to be favored. The current emperor adored petite, delicate women, and her tearful phoenix eyes and slightly furrowed brows made her irresistibly pitiful. Indeed, he noticed her at first glance. One snowy night, she was summoned to the emperor's chambers for the first time. The snow fell heavily that night, and the brazier in the room glowed warmly. Wan Yuan sat nervously on the edge of the bed, unable to lift her head. She noticed the emperor's bright yellow shoes approaching gradually, a pleasant scent of incense filling the air. "Raise your head," the emperor commanded. His voice was soft but carried an undeniable authority. Slowly, she raised her head, gazing upon his face for the first time. Surprisingly, her legs didn't give out as she had imagined. She observed the emperor's face, her mind wandering. He looks so much like father, she thought. The same stature, the same beard, though their features differed. Her father lacked the emperor's eyes. She stared at him, forgetting to curtsy until she snapped back to her senses and dropped to her knees with a thud. Wan Yuan was terrified. Naturally timid, she feared being scolded for her lack of decorum. However, the emperor did not rebuke her. Instead, he extended his hand. Wan Yuan hesitated before placing her hand in his. He helped her to her feet. His hand was so warm that she was reluctant to let go. The candles burned late into the night, and from that evening on, Wan Yuan became favored. Everyone had expected it. The emperor kept her by his side for several days in a row, bestowing upon her the title of noble lady. Soon after, she was promoted to the rank of Guiren. Rumors spread throughout the palace, with many attributing her rise to her beautiful appearance. Some of her fellow entrants to the palace privately dismissed her as a little white lotus, their tone dripping with disdain. In truth, Wan Yuan didn't understand what made her appearance so exceptional. Though her features were refined, years of taking medicine had left her complexion far less radiant than other girls her age. Her personality wasn't particularly appealing either. Her father often scolded her for her timid demeanor. With a constant furrow in her brow, how could she be considered beautiful? If anyone deserved to be called a beauty, it was her younger sister. Bright and radiant, her sister was like a flower blooming with fervor on the plains. Wherever her sister went, she became the center of attention. Her father doted on her sister, teaching her to read and write personally. Her sister, lively and unrestrained, was never scolded for her antics. She mastered horseback riding and archery, didn't have to embroider diligently, and could laugh as freely as she pleased. Compared to her sister, Wan Yuan's life seemed far less enviable. Yet, bloodlines mattered. No amount of favor her sister received could change the fact that Wan Yuan, as the legitimate daughter, held a higher status. So, when the time for selection came, Wan Yuan saw her father again after several days apart. Kneeling obediently before him, she listened as he tapped the table rhythmically, the room silent. She dared not lift her head to look. Then, her father spoke with his usual sternness. "You will enter the palace." Wan Yuan was startled. Her heart raced with excitement as she hurriedly bowed and thanked him repeatedly. Her father's face remained as indifferent as ever, and her sister, standing at his side, showed no trace of sadness. Her sister didn't seem disappointed at all. But so what? For Wan Yuan, it felt like a moment of triumph. For over a decade, she had lived in this house with food and clothing in abundance, but without affection. The day she entered the palace, snow blanketed the capital. Her mother, overwhelmed with sorrow, carried the scent of incense from the family's shrine as she tearfully caressed Wan Yuan's face. Though choked with emotion, her mother managed to say, "My foolish child, take care of yourself." Wan Yuan entered the palace full of joy. Everyone said she was destined to be favored, and she truly was. Wan Yuan's favor came so easily, making others green with envy. She lowered her head and smiled as the palace servants knelt before her, flattering her with the title, "Your Grace." The eagerness and fawning in their expressions were things she had never encountered before in her life. Thus, she paid no mind to the cold stares hidden in the shadows. The eunuch by the emperor's side was skilled at reading the room. On multiple occasions, he subtly guided the people below, shielding Wan Yuan from overt and covert hostility. The eunuch understood what the emperor needed. The emperor liked her for her beauty, for her youthful innocence. Because of this, he didn't mind bestowing upon her lavish affection to make the blush on her cheeks even deeper. He rewarded her with jewels and fine silks, granted her a uniquely exquisite residence, and even allowed her a private chef. The medicine Wan Yuan took daily was prepared by a team of imperial physicians. Wan Yuan had been given so much that it felt as though the winter storms inside her heart had been swept away by a spring breeze, bringing forth blossoms on 1,000 trees. She thought to herself, "I am good enough. I am someone worth cherishing. I will also become the daughter my father can be proud of." During the summer retreat to the imperial villa, the emperor only brought the empress and Wan Yuan, leaving no doubt she had become a thorn in the side of others. Upon returning from the villa, the other concubines often dragged her into dull gatherings. Among the throng of courtesans, Wan Yuan would always find herself punished under some pretext or another. One evening, she was transcribing scriptures, tears falling as she wrote. The emperor happened upon her and wiped her tears away, tilting her chin in his palm as he gazed at her in thought. Wan Yuan noticed that his expression seemed strange, as though he were looking at her, but his thoughts were elsewhere. There was tenderness in his eyes. "You don't have to write anymore." After that, no one dared to trouble Wan Yuan again. This gesture undoubtedly brought her great comfort and erased her timidity. Wan Yuan gradually became more lively, increasingly enjoying lying in the emperor's arms and acting coy. The emperor once asked why her demeanor had changed so much, but before Wan Yuan could answer, he smiled knowingly. Wan Yuan had no idea that the emperor had seen the starlight in her eyes as she gazed at him, unable to hide the admiration that filled her gaze. At 16, Wan Yuan had fallen for him. The emperor adored her eyes, pure, the eyes of a young girl. He had seen many such eyes before, but he never tired of them. Only eyes like hers could make him forget the burdens of state affairs and his aging body. A girl's genuine affection and deep feelings are an eternal remedy for the heart. As autumn approached, Wan Yuan's cough worsened. The emperor ordered the imperial physicians to care for her diligently, but avoided her quarters to escape the risk of illness. By the time Wan Yuan recovered, the emperor still had not come to visit. Her maid, Swear, quietly told her that a certain consort, skilled in music and dance, had been receiving the emperor's attention lately. Wan Yuan vaguely remembered the name. During the selection process, she had been a stunning beauty, bold and spirited. The matrons had admonished her back then, warning her to tone down her loud and unruly ways, for they were neither proper nor to the emperor's liking. At the time, the consort had retorted, insisting, "This is who I am. I can't change." As expected, Wan Yuan had taken all the emperor's favor, leaving the others to endure their cold chambers, this woman included. It seemed she had now put in the effort to reclaim the emperor's attention while Wan Yuan was unwell. Wan Yuan was despondent, weeping daily until she seemed on the verge of falling ill again. Swear, who was quite clever, led her to the eunuch's quarters. With reddened eyes, Wan Yuan discreetly handed him a box and bowed deeply. "Please inform His Majesty that Yuaner has recovered." The eunuch quickly helped her up, accepted the box, and spoke carefully, his words flawless and unrevealing. Whether he would convey her message, she couldn't tell. Swayer tried to comfort her. "Don't worry, my lady. I've heard that consort offended many eunuchs and maids with her arrogance." Wan Yuan forced a smile, but that vibrant and fiery consort reminded her of her younger sister, someone she both feared and envied. That evening, Wan Yuan stubbornly waited. Late into the night, as the candlewick sputtered, her heart mirrored its flickering. Suddenly, she heard familiar footsteps. Though no one announced his arrival, she recognized the sound. Wan Yuan nearly burst into tears. Her voice, low and laced with grievance, trembled as she spoke. "I remember when I was little, Mother would stay up all night, lighting candles as she waited for Father. But each time the candles burned out, Father still wouldn't come." Wan Yuan stared blankly at the flickering candlelight until a warm hand covered her eyes. The Emperor's breath, soft and warm, brushed against her neck. "I am not your father. You don't need to light candles for me." Her back rested against the Emperor's chest, and a wave of warmth dispelled the chill of autumn. Nestled in his embrace, Wan Yuan asked coquettishly, "Will your Majesty come again tomorrow night?" The Emperor's laughter rumbled near her ear. "Yes." And she smiled too. The plum tree in the courtyard had stood there for many years, its branches covered with blossoms. Thanks to it, the cold palace walls gained a splash of vibrant color. Inside the chamber, the brazier was lit, filling the room with warmth. When the snow stopped, Wan Yuan ordered the windows opened. The Emperor, seated on the divan, immediately noticed the plum tree standing proud in the courtyard. "Your Majesty," Wan Yuan called softly. The Emperor was lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the plum blossoms. She lowered her head and carefully pushed a plate of pastries she had made herself toward him. When he turned his head, he caught her delicate movement. There was a cautiousness to it, tinged with a hint of concealed eagerness to please. Since her illness in the fall, Wan Yuan had changed. Her eyes often carried a faint sorrow, a look the Emperor knew all too well. He picked up a piece of the pastry. The almond flavor spread across his tongue, a taste he favored, much like the shy smile blooming on Wan Yuan's face. "I like it," the Emperor said. The smile in Wan Yuan's eyes deepened, as if it could pierce through the bitter chill of winter. For a moment, the Emperor seemed absent-minded. When he left that day, the chief eunuch noticed something unusual about him. "Your Majesty?" The Emperor paused beside the palanquin, glancing once more at the plum tree. "Your Majesty, is there something wrong with the plum tree in Lady Wan's courtyard?" The Emperor said nothing. That evening, as he prepared for bed, he suddenly issued an order. "Tomorrow, send more flowers and plants to Lady Wan's courtyard. A single plum tree is far too lonely." The eunuch bowed, immediately arranging for rare plants from the conservatory to be delivered to Wan Yuan. Such a gesture left Wan Yuan overwhelmed. Since her illness, her heart had been restless, uncertain of where she stood. The eunuch, observing the young lady, recounted her background and behavior since entering the palace. She seemed obedient, composed, and non-confrontational, a promising figure. "Your Grace, these flowers are precious," he said. "They are usually reserved for the year-end rituals, and not even the Empress has them. This gift is uniquely yours." Wan Yuan trembled as she accepted the gesture. Before leaving, the eunuch advised her, "His Majesty cherishes you. You must take care of your health and not burden yourself with worries. Only then can you stay by his side for a long time." Exclusive favor. Wan Yuan understood all too well what that meant for a woman in the palace. She gazed at the plum tree in the courtyard, tears streaming down her face. The eunuch, walking beneath the red palace walls, sighed as snow began to fall again. A young eunuch held an umbrella for him as he muttered to himself, recalling an old memory. Long ago, when the Emperor was still a child, his mother, the Empress Dowager, lived in neglect. Neither the late Emperor nor her servants cared for her. Her courtyard had been desolate until one winter when a vibrant red plum tree suddenly bloomed, its branches reaching over the walls and catching the late emperor's attention. The young emperor, frail and unremarkable compared to his siblings, rarely saw his father. But that plum tree became a symbol of hope, granting him a rare opportunity to meet the late emperor. Though it was just a passing comment, it planted a seed in the young boy's heart. He began tending to the tree meticulously, hoping for more recognition. Yet the late emperor never returned. When the emperor later left the palace to establish his residence, he never planted plum trees in his estate, perhaps to avoid confronting those memories. But the tree in Wan Yuan's courtyard had unwittingly reopened a wound, reminding him of his childhood longing and solitude. The eunuch sighed again. The world only saw how much the emperor favored young women like Lady Wan, but never questioned why. The anxious, yearning look in Lady Wan's eyes, her delicate mix of hesitation and hope, mirrored the young emperor himself. The eunuch sighed once more. Though the emperor had triumphed in the vicious struggle for the throne and ascended to supremacy, he could not escape the shadow of his past regrets. He could only hope that Lady Wan would understand and avoid showing even a hint of sorrow in front of the emperor again. Year-end celebrations arrived, marked by the emperor's birthday, a grand occasion in the palace. Wan Yuan, sensing the pressure, prepared diligently. Fueled by a newfound sense of urgency, she sought out a dance instructor, practicing in secret with great effort. At 16, Wan Yuan carried a youthful fearlessness. It was this bravery that drove her to an unexpected act during the banquet. When she saw a crazed woman lunging at the emperor, dagger in hand, Wan Yuan instinctively threw herself in front of him. The blade pierced her back. Pain coursed through her body as she let out a muffled cry. Guards immediately subdued the assailant, standing protectively around the emperor. Amid the chaos, the chief eunuch's sharp voice called for a physician. Wan Yuan wore a pale blue gown made from a rare fabric gifted by the emperor. The occasion was special, and she had dressed carefully, hoping to impress him with the dance she had practiced so tirelessly. But now, the fabric was soaked in blood. Cradled in the emperor's trembling arms, she felt his warmth against her. The emperor stroked her face and murmured, "Don't be afraid. You'll be fine. I'll save you." In that moment, her pain seemed to fade. She managed a weak smile, unsure whether she had saved the emperor or he had saved her. The physicians arrived swiftly, their knees trembling before the emperor's icy demeanor. Fortunately, the wound was shallow, avoiding any vital areas. After proper treatment, she would recover fully. The physicians breathed a collective sigh of relief, grateful their lives were spared. Wan Yuan's favor with the emperor only grew stronger. Confined to her bed, Wan Yuan noticed new additions to her household, including a diligent maid named Chana, who proved a capable companion alongside Swayer. The emperor often visited Wan Yuan, keeping her company, chatting with her, and feeding her medicine. The health scare from last autumn did not recur, and her inner worries were completely alleviated. Despite her injuries, her face was often adorned with a cheerful smile. "It's a good thing your majesty didn't get hurt," she teased playfully. "The pain from this wound is unbearable." The emperor gently stroked her silky hair and said warmly, "Once you recover and the weather warms up, I'll take you on a tour of the south." Wan Yuan's eyes sparkled with joy, and she nearly sat up in excitement, only to be held down by the emperor, who smiled at her with affection. Despite her discomfort from lying in bed, the promise of spring filled her with anticipation. The newly appointed maid, Chana, massaged her legs while mentioning her injury and bringing up the woman who had attempted to assassinate the emperor. Chana seemed to know of the woman, saying she had been in the palace for over a decade and had once been favored. No one knew what offense she had committed to fall from grace, but the emperor eventually cast her aside. Chana sighed, saying the woman had been driven mad. The imperial harem can drive any woman insane. Wan Yuan felt a brief moment of distraction before feeling grateful for her own favor and disciplined demeanor, which, she thought, would never lead her to such a fate. However, She held the woman in contempt for daring to attack the emperor, a crime punishable by the execution of one's entire family. To Wang Yuan, such a reckless act was utterly despicable. She assumed the woman must have had a terrible temperament, making her rejection by the emperor inevitable. As her recovery progressed, Wang Yuan overheard from a maid that the woman had not been executed. This struck her as highly unusual. Though she refrained from directly questioning the emperor, Wang Yuan discreetly sought information and learned that the emperor had devised an excuse to pardon the madwoman. Pardoning an assassination attempt defied all logic, filling Wang Yuan with intense curiosity. When she was finally able to move about, she found herself irresistibly drawn to the woman's residence. Compared to Wang Yuan's opulent chambers, the woman's palace was cold and barren. Though not dilapidated, it exuded an icy emptiness. A gust of wind sent a chill through Wang Yuan's body. The palace was attended only by an elderly servant who, surprisingly, was unfazed by Wang Yuan's visit and invited her inside. Holding Wang Yuan's arm, Swayer hesitated, her expression betraying reluctance. But Wang Yuan steeled herself and stepped forward. Inside, the woman sat on a low couch, her hair disheveled, with curtains draped haphazardly around the room. She held a candle, its flickering flame illuminating her face. As she turned, Wang Yuan gasped in shock. The right side of the woman's face, near her ear, was marred by a horrifying scar that extended down to her collarbone. Wang Yuan recalled the emperor's birthday banquet, where the woman had styled her hair intricately and dressed meticulously to conceal the disfigurement. No one had noticed her injuries then. Now, her face appeared ghastly and unsightly. The woman let out a deranged laugh. "I know why you're here," she sneered. "Of course the emperor wouldn't punish me. I am his beloved consort." Swayer instinctively pulled Wang Yuan back, urging her to leave. But Wang Yuan, suddenly overcome by anger, pressed Swayer's hand down. How dare this woman, who nearly harmed the emperor, act so arrogantly? "Why did you attempt the assassination?" Wang Yuan demanded. The woman set the candle aside and seemed to calm down, gently stroking the scar on her face. Her gaze drifted off, lost in thought, before fixing on Wang Yuan with an intensifying fervor. "I was your age when I entered the palace," she began. "Young, full of dreams and beautiful, just like you. I didn't want to attack him," she continued bitterly. "But I had carefully dressed up for him, and yet the emperor didn't spare me a glance." She pointed to her scarred face. "Years ago, I saved the emperor. There was a fire at the summer palace, set by bandits. I helped him escape while he was drunk, but the fire burned half my face." Her voice became sharp and anguished. "I saved him, and he despised me for my ugliness." Suddenly, the woman lunged toward Wang Yuan, who quickly stepped aside. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "Don't you see? All the favor and affection you have, it's only because you're beautiful. Do you think you're special?" Swayer could no longer bear to stay and dragged the stunned Wang Yuan out of the room. Behind them, the woman's voice rang out, filled with endless despair. "With 3,000 beauties in the imperial harem, what love can one woman truly claim?" Her words, like an eerie chant, echoed in Wang Yuan's mind, haunting her dreams that night. Wang Yuan refused to believe it. She was convinced that she held a unique place in the emperor's heart. After all, even the eunuch had said so, her favor was unparalleled. Besides, the emperor had promised to take her on a southern tour. Comforting herself with these thoughts, Wang Yuan eventually fell into a deep sleep. The emperor did not disappoint Wang Yuan. She eagerly anticipated the southern tour, and preparations in the palace were underway. As a young girl, Wang Yuan lacked composure, and over the past year, the emperor had pampered her so much that her excitement often showed in her words. The emperor indulged her. A scar now adorned her fair back. Wang Yuan had seen it in the mirror. It was ugly and jarring. Yet, during their nights together, the emperor would touch her scar with a look of pity in his eyes. Wang Yuan thought, "See, that woman was wrong. However, when spring arrived, the southern tour was abruptly postponed. The news reached Wan Yuan's quarters while she was laughing with Swayer about new dress patterns. A eunuch announced that Wan Yuan's father had been accused of corruption, with conclusive evidence, and was now imprisoned. Wan Yuan felt her heart sink. She stared in disbelief at the young eunuch, asking repeatedly, "What did you say?" It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Though Wan Yuan was her father's legitimate daughter, her mother had been out of favor, and her father had always been indifferent toward her. This made Wan Yuan timid and cautious. She had been sent to the palace not because of any special expectations, but because her family needed to present one of its eligible daughters. Her father hadn't imagined that Wan Yuan would gain the emperor's favor. Yet, her rise in status also elevated her family's fortunes, especially after she saved the emperor's life. The emperor rewarded her father generously. In reality, her father hadn't done anything particularly egregious afterward. But his sudden prominence made him a target. Rivals dug up old offenses and submitted evidence to the emperor. Corruption was the one thing the emperor would not tolerate. The investigation proceeded swiftly, and the charges were confirmed. Dismissal and exile were inevitable. In the harem, Wan Yuan was as restless as an ant on a hot pan. She soon learned that her father had already confessed and only pleaded for mercy toward the rest of the family. Wan Yuan collapsed to the ground in despair. Swayer sobbed, telling her that her father still cared about her well-being. Wan Yuan gave a bitter laugh, knowing deep down that her father wouldn't survive. The exile would lead him to a desolate, frigid land, and at his age, he wouldn't last long. That night, the emperor didn't visit. A eunuch explained that the emperor was busy with state affairs and had chosen to rest in the side hall. He brought Wan Yuan some snacks as a gift from the emperor. Before leaving, he sighed, "Your Grace, please take care of yourself. Try not to disturb the emperor unless it's urgent." Wan Yuan sat curled up on her bed, forcing a wry smile. She made up her mind. She needed to see her father one last time. Perhaps by royal decree, she was allowed into the prison without much difficulty. Her father, now frail and disheveled, looked nothing like the strong figure she had once known. His hair was white and his demeanor defeated. Tears streaming down her face, she called out, "Father." He lifted his head and, seeing her, addressed her formally. "Your Grace, you've come." She laid out the wine and food she had brought, but he didn't touch them. With a trembling voice, she asked if he blamed her. Her father shook his head and, to her shock, bowed deeply to her. "Your Grace, I thank you for your great kindness. I am just a simple man. My heart still clings to my wife and children. After my exile, I beg you to take care of them." Wan Yuan felt a chill pierce through her. She wiped her tears and, with a voice growing colder, said, "So it's true. It's true, Father. You've always been biased." She stormed out, unable to contain years of suppressed emotions. Her father's confession wasn't out of concern for her. It was to protect his other children, the ones born to his concubine. He feared they'd suffer because of him. Wan Yuan had only been sent to the palace because her younger sister didn't want to go. Her father doted on her sister and wouldn't subject her to the hardships of court life. He knew Wan Yuan was meek and would obey without complaint. Her mother, a proper wife chosen by matchmakers, had been trapped in a loveless marriage. After Wan Yuan was born, her father took a favored concubine who bore him several children. Wan Yuan remembered her father never smiling at her. As a child, she thought him incapable of joy until she saw him playing with her half-siblings, laughing with them in the courtyard. She wasn't worthy of his laughter, it seemed. Standing beneath the towering red walls of the Forbidden City, Wan Yuan whispered, "Father, you'll have to look up to see your eldest daughter now." Swayer left the room briefly, while Chunner poured Wan Yuan some tea. She quietly suggested, "Your Grace, perhaps you should plead with the emperor." Wan Yuan let out a bitter laugh. The harem must not interfere in state affairs. What use would it be for me to go? Chunner shook her head. "But your Grace, you're favored. Even if the punishment isn't revoked, you might at least ease his suffering. As a daughter, how can you bear to watch him suffer? Wang Yuan's heart throbbed with pain. She clutched her forehead, trying to suppress the anguish. Your Grace, don't worry. The Emperor cares for you. The worst outcome would be the status quo, Chun'er encouraged. Wang Yuan suddenly sat up straight. Sui returned to find her mistress, rushing out the door. Alarmed, she asked Chun'er, "What's happening?" Chun'er shook her head, equally worried. But Sui was too late. By the time she caught up, Wang Yuan was already kneeling before the Emperor's sedan chair. Wang Yuan knew she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. Her entire life had been spent yearning for her father's recognition. She had to plead with the Emperor. She wanted her father to look at her, to see her as someone worthy of pride. But life rarely grants what one desires most. The Emperor said nothing. His once tender eyes were now cold and unfeeling. The eunuch glanced at Wang Yuan kneeling to the side and raised his hand to signal the sedan to move forward. No one looked back at her. Wang Yuan's forehead pressed against the cold ground, the pain radiating through her body. That night, the news came. Her father had taken his own life in the prison cell, leaving the food she had sent untouched. In late spring, the eunuch arrived at Wang Yuan's quarters with an imperial edict. The emperor had written a long decree, the gist of which accused Wang Yuan of being arrogant due to favor and sentenced her to confinement in her palace. Indeed, her act of intercepting the emperor's carriage and kneeling to plead for her father, wasn't that the epitome of arrogance from being overly favored? Wang Yuan silently accepted the edict. The eunuch sighed in disappointment, shaking his head. He thought to himself, she's too young, too naive, spoiled by favor, and completely lacks awareness. The emperor despised interference in court matters from the harem, even from the empress. How could she not understand such a simple truth? The emperor, already advanced in age, sought someone gentle and obedient by his side. The eunuch had placed his hopes on Wang Yuan. There had been many Wang Yuan-s in the palace before her. Watching the emperor's fresh infatuation, the eunuch had thought she might be the last. What a pity! Wang Yuan sat at her table, while Chun'er poured her a cup of tea. My lady, have some tea. Wang Yuan rested her chin in her hand, observing her. It seems you've never addressed me as master, have you? Chun'er fell to her knees with a thud. Wang Yuan smiled. Then who is your true master? Now that she thought about it, whether it was the disfigured woman or her current predicament, Chun'er always subtly guided events. But was it Chun'er's fault? No, Chun'er had only articulated what she herself had secretly desired. Chun'er had merely given a timely nudge. Wang Yuan laughed silently. Leave. Don't let me see you again. When her father died, she had lost the strength to care about anything else. By taking his own life, her father retained a shred of dignity, better than dying in exile. Her father had never expected her to save him. Her Amma couldn't see her, even in death, and would never see her again. The emperor was disappointed in her. He had refused her plea, taking with him her brief favor as well. By late autumn, the coal fire in her room filled the air with choking fumes, leaving Wang Yuan with a persistent headache. Hugging her knees, she stared at the flickering candle flame and began to laugh. At last, she understood the madwoman. Wang Yuan realized that her favor was gone. She could only wait, just as she had waited last autumn when she was ill, hoping desperately that the emperor would remember her. But now, the pain was 100 times worse. Day after day, no one came. Her despair deepened. Could the emperor really be so heartless? Was one mistake enough to erase all their past affection? Sui, unable to bear seeing her mistress so despondent, quietly informed her that the emperor already had another favored consort, as delicate and charming as she once was. The trees in her courtyard stood bare. Wang Yuan's heart grew cold. At 17, she still didn't know how to handle love. All she could do was endure the bitterness and continue living day by day. When the emperor finally came to see Wang Yuan, the once vibrant girl had lost her radiance. Even with the bright red plum blossoms blooming in the courtyard, their color couldn't reach her face. She still looked pitiful, her brows furrowed in sorrow. But the emperor noticed the difference. There was no light in her eyes. Wan Yuan's time in the palace had been short. She was still inexperienced. Looking at the emperor, who had finally come to see her, she smiled. "Do you remember asking me why my temperament changed so much? It's because I wasn't smart enough. I thought that having your love meant having everything. I was so happy thinking of you every day. But now that happiness is gone, I think I don't love you anymore." Her words were spoken in defiance. She resented him for neglecting her for so long, for the illusion of affection that had lured her into this abyss. The emperor looked at her for a long time, then turned and left without even entering the room. He never came back. She was still too young. She thought she might spend her life wandering the palace, slowly withering away like a flower. She tried to hate the emperor, but the more she hated, the more she thought of him, and the pain became unbearable. Maybe time will dull it, she thought, like the other women in the harem. But Wan Yuan didn't live for decades. The following winter, she woke suddenly from a dream. Outside, the plum tree in her courtyard was in full bloom. She realized it was her third year in the palace, and she was only 18. Swayer burst in, flustered. Wan Yuan faintly heard the sound of bells tolling in the distance, mournfully echoing through the snow. She stared blankly at the falling snowflakes. Swayer knelt, knocking her head against the ground as she cried, "My lady, the emperor has passed away." Wan Yuan turned her head slowly. Swayer, sobbing, looked up to see her mistress staring at her with vacant eyes. "My lady." Wan Yuan finally moved, her gaze regaining focus. On the other side of the palace wall, people were shouting, their voices chaotic. She laughed. "You're lying." As if hearing the most absurd joke, she shook her head and sneered. "I don't believe it." Wan Yuan's eyes widened. He couldn't die. The funeral bells tolled endlessly. Before the eunuch could deliver the imperial edict to her courtyard, a piercing scream rang out from within. The emperor was gone. She had loved and hated him, but before time could erode those feelings, it had all ended abruptly. Wan Yuan cried bitterly. She was only 18, at the peak of her youth. She jumped into the courtyard well. Her life, too, did not span decades. The Imperial Medical Bureau recorded that the late emperor died of a sudden cold. Perhaps it had been too cold that winter. The aging emperor, diligent in his duties, stayed up all night reviewing memorials. By dawn, he rested his head on his desk and never rose again. It was just a cold, but the emperor's years weighed heavily on him. That year, both the court and harem were in turmoil. Fierce power struggles among the princes resulted in the deaths of several ministers. Meanwhile, in the harem, a favored consort fell abruptly out of favor for reasons unknown. The emperor, burdened with worries, could not recover from his intermittent illness. The succession dispute made his condition a closely guarded secret. In the depths of winter, the emperor dictated several edicts, settled the matter of succession, and passed away peacefully. Among those edicts, one was peculiar. It ordered a certain consort to be immediately dismissed from the palace, stripped of her title, and returned to civilian status. Once a woman entered the palace, she could never leave except in death. Though the edict was framed as a punishment, it was, in reality, a reward. Such singular favor was extraordinary. When the new emperor reviewed the edict, he asked the chief eunuch, "Why is this still here?" "Your Majesty, the consort was not fated to enjoy this honor. Before the edict could reach her, she had already taken her own life." The emperor nodded, faithful to the end. What became of her afterward? The eunuch replied solemnly, "It was sudden, during the late emperor's mourning period. Her burial was simple, and she was interred with the emperor in the Western Mausoleum." In his mind, the eunuch could still vividly recall her face and voice. She had been such a stubborn girl,